Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. So last week we did a subscriber deck, and I was quite overwhelmed to see many of you sending me in your decks, which is awesome. So I'd just like to say, for those who don't know, I'm going to start doing a sort of subscriber deck series where I'll play any of your decks that you send to me. So if you want to send me your deck for me to play next week, you can send me either on Twitter or my email or even down in the comments section below. If you'd like me to make some edits to it, or if you've even just got a concept that you want me to try and make real, then send me that down in the comment section below, and I'll hopefully see it and hopefully play it next week. So without further ado, this week we are going to be playing White Weenie. This is probably my favourite archetype in all of Magic because it's very aggressive, and I'd never panned white as aggressive when I first started out playing, which is probably why I attached to it so much. But let's check out the deck, shall we? White Weenie is essentially an aggressive white deck that revolves around getting loads of little low mana cost creatures out really fast and just damaging your opponent. So we've pretty much gone with that. First of all, we've got Kythian, Hero of Akros. This is our Planeswalker creature. For most of your veteran players, you'll know this one because it's in the first set. So at the end of combat, if Kythian, Hero of Akros has at least 2 other creatures attacking with it, then you exile it and return him to the battlefield transformed as a Planeswalker. He's also able to give himself indestructible as well, which means that you can sort of, if they've got a load of 2 toughness creatures, you can just throw him into the attack if you're in a bit of a stalemate, because you can always make him indestructible, and he's quite hard to remove in that sense. And we will have quite a lot of creatures on the battlefield, so it's quite likely that we'll be able to flip him. So he's flipped form. What you can do with him is you can +2 and you can make one of your opponent's creatures try to attack Gideon. And what this does is it allows you to put your tank of a creature in front of it and essentially make your opponent's suicide attack into Gideon, which is fantastic. The other ability is to +1 and give one of your creatures indestructible, and you can also untap it. So if it hasn't got vigilance, for example, you can attack in, +1, it gets indestructible, untaps, and for your opponent's turn, it is indestructible for that entire time. So you've got a nice little blocker for keeping Gideon alive. And you can also make him a 0 cost, for 0, sorry. You can make him a 4/4 soldier with indestructible, and no damage is taken to him. Which, with a few combinations, like Thalia's Lieutenant, you can actually make him a lot bigger than he is. So, moving on, we've got Expedition Envoy. He pretty much speaks for himself. He's 1 mana for a 2/1. Early game, it's your perfect 1-drop. It can get in a few little bits of damage, and with a few other little features, like giving them first strike and pumping with Thalia's Lieutenant. You just essentially want to get out as many creatures as possible, and Expedition Envoy is a great way to do that. We've got Hanvir Militia Captain. So he's a 2 mana 2/2. Great. Awesome. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you've got 4 or more creatures, then you can transform him. So this creature is mostly in here for the stalemates that you might end up getting in the late game. So if you've got a lot of creatures out, but you just can't quite get past theirs, then you end up building them up to the point where you can get your Militia Captain to transform. And if she does, then she becomes a creature with power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. And on your end step, you get another 1/1 white human cleric. Fantastic. So you can go a little bit wide with her, and you can go quite deep with this one. So she can hold off the late game by getting in front of some of the bigger creatures, as long as you've got the soldiers to back her up, essentially. Thalia's Lieutenant, a 2/2, a 1/1 for 2. So when he enters the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on each other human creature you control. So this isn't actually a human tribal deck. However, as you may notice, there are a lot of humans in the deck, so he still hits a lot of stuff. There's only a few exceptions with the Coal Soldier ally, and also Gideon's tokens are Knight allies, so it won't hit any of them. But for the most part, very useful. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you can put a 1/1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. So Thalia's Lieutenant's capable of getting as big as the Militia Captain over here, so that's another big creature for the late game. Also enough to push through a lot of damage if you've got a load of creatures out. Give them all +1/+1, strike in for the finish. So a lot of the times that's how it ends up being. Knight of the White Orchid, it's better on the draw than it is on the play. So it's a 2/2 for 2 with first strike, and when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, then you may search your library for a plains and put it on the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle your library. So when I mention that it's better on the draw, it's because a lot of the time when your opponent's on the play, they'll likely be on their third land on your third turn. So you can play this before making your land drop, get your third land off the trigger, and then you can play your fourth land, and you can now play any of your 2/2s or even 2/1/1s. So you can get a lot of value out. On the play, however, a lot of time you might want to just get him out sooner rather than later, so you may not get this advantage. But it's still a 2/2 with first strike, which is great. Console's Lieutenant, it's another creature that wants to come down really early. The sooner you get this creature out, the better. The problem with it is it's a 2/1 first strike, and it's only really good if you've managed to get an attack in with it. We do have plenty of evasion, so you can still get an attack in the late game, but if you've got this down on turn 2 and turn 3 they haven't played a creature, then you can essentially pump up your team with the Console's Lieutenant, which is fantastic. Core Blade Whirl, it's one of the few allies in this deck. When it enters the battlefield, or another ally enters the battlefield, then all our creatures, all of them, not just the allies, gain first strike. So it allows us to get a lot of chump blocks out of the way. So Expedition Envoy is not really good in the late game, but as a first striker he becomes essentially a 2/2 with first strike. It's that kind of deal. Really useful. You can also get Gideon's ally tokens, will also trigger it as well. So if you have Gideon out, then it's a great way to do it. And also the Envoy is also an ally. So we do have a few ways to trigger the Blade Whirl, but it's mostly in there as sort of a combat trick for a one-time use kind of deal. There are ways to trigger it, of course, but not many. Toppan Freeblade, absolute autofill for a White Weenie deck. It's a 2/2 4/2 with Vigilance and Renown, so it has the potential to become a 3/3. So it's a great attacker, and it's also a great blocker as well. Especially if you can get the Renown in, it becomes a 3/3 Vigilance, which is a little bit hard to deal with in the early game. So we've talked about all the creatures and the fact that quite difficult to get through a lot of things. So we have a bit of an evasion suite here. So we have Grasp of the Hieromancer. So you enchant it, and whenever the creature attacks, then you can tap a creature. So in the late game, maybe they've got a 6/6 out the way, but the rest of it's just Scion tokens or something like that. You can get the 6/6 out the way and swing in with your team and force a lot of chump blocks. Maybe even get in that last little bit of damage if it's their only creature, which is awesome. And Nimbus Wings, you want to put this on like your Console's Lieutenant and stuff like that, because you can give it flying. And there's not a lot of flyers in the format at the moment, or at least I haven't noticed anyway. There is occasionally Thopters does pop by, but if you're giving them +1/+2, then a lot of Thopters won't be able to trade off with whatever creature you've given Nimbus Wings. So it's probably the best evasion card out here. Expose Evil. I only put this in recently. I'm not sure about it. It may be a cut kind of card. But it allows us to, on maybe your opponent's end step, to tap 2 creatures to clear the way for your team to finish off your opponent. We also get to investigate off of this as well, so if it's not quite the end, then we get a little bit of card advantage, which can be a bit of an issue for our deck. There isn't a much card draw, but then again, we are supposed to win as early as possible, so if our deck's going right, we won't ever need that investigate token. Declaration in Stone, probably our best removal card in this deck. Exile target creature and all of the creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. They get to investigate for each non-token creature exiled this way. Ooh, sorry. So, essentially, this will get rid of any creature they have as long as it doesn't have hexproof. And it's a board wipe if they're playing tokens. So, if their entire board is based off of 2/2 knights, and that's the only way they're going to keep from losing, Declaration in Stone for 2 mana, and wipe all the tokens off the battlefield in that manner, and then you can swing in for the victory. Speaks for itself for the most part. Always watching. This is the main reason I wanted to do White Weenie this week, because I have not actually built a deck with this in yet. So I wanted to play around with it just a bit. 3 mana enchantment, so non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. that suddenly turns your aggressive board into quite a defensive one as well. So all your creatures suddenly have vigilance, they're able to block on the backswing, and some of them have first strike as well, so it creates stalemates for our opponent if they're trying to aggro us out or try to swing in after we've swung in, that kind of deal. Really great card. Only 2 of, sadly, but it is a rare, so we can't do much about it. Make a Stand. So creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until the end of the turn. This is in here because with the aggressiveness of this deck, you often want to empty your hand out as quickly as possible to get as wide a board as possible and most damaged out. But that leaves you susceptible to board wipes like Planar Outburst. Unfortunately, we can't really play around Languish too much. We can kind of give Thalia's Lieutenant triggers to make our creatures like 4/4s and stuff like that, but it's still not enough to get away from Languish, and I wouldn't say it's any reason not to play this deck anyway, because a lot of the time when they're languishing the board away, you've got a lot of damage on them, so they're pretty much at their last moments. But with Make a Stand, Planar Outburst, one of the key board wipes in the metagame, is just pretty much redundant. You can also use it to have the Final Blow as well, so you can give all your creatures +1/+0, and you won't lose any of them, and if they're vigilant, then there's literally nothing to lose by doing that kind of attack. Angelic Purge, this is our key removal. So as an additional cost, sacrifice a permanent. Permanent tends to be the land, because with the low cost of this deck, you can often get flooded out with lands. So you can essentially tap the 3 mana, sacrifice one of the tapped white lands that you've played, and you can exile either an artifact, creature, or enchantment. So it's a really, really versatile removal spell. And of course, we must save you from yourselves, as you know. It's in here for mill, that kind of thing. It could even get rid of their own Always Watching. I have actually, in playtesting, gotten rid of an Always Watching in a humans deck, which actually got me the game. Exile artifacts, you know, if they're playing the Brain in the Jar deck, then you can get rid of the Brain in the Jar that way. Final card, Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. I considered cutting him because I really liked how aggressive this deck was, and at 4 mana, you pretty much spend a turn doing it. He's really good though, but, you know, I don't think the deck would suffer to not have him in. Most of the time, this deck has won by turn 4. Quite a fair few times when I've been playing it. It is really aggressive. But this guy, you know, he sticks around for the late game. You can also get him in with the team. For +1, you get him to be a 5/5 human soldier ally. And he's indestructible, blah, blah, blah. You can't destroy him. He's badass. You can also start going wide with 2/2 white ally tokens. Unfortunately, that does not trigger Always Watching. They are tokens, so they will not get the vigilance, which is a little bit unfortunate. And you can even emblem Gideon if you so feel like it. If you've been +1ing him and you can afford to do the -4, you can give all your creatures +1/+1, which can end the game in some cases. There was a point where my opponent had just tapped down my creatures after I'd played the Gideon and was threatening to destroy it, so I emblemed him and managed to get him through to the victory that way as well. That's pretty much the deck. So the land base is here. 18 planes, maybe even go down a few less. I wouldn't go too far down. 17 is about as low as I would ever go, because you don't want to get mana screwed, but if you're one of those people who quits out if they don't get the kind of hand they want, then maybe you go down to 17. Westvale Abbey is the only interesting land that we have. So mostly it's in here for sacrificing 5 creatures to make Ormondal, the Profane Prince. So you can also pay 1 life and make a 1/1 black human cleric token, which is alright. I wouldn't do it. You'll probably never get to 5 without wanting to win anyway, which is why you want to mainly use him to do this. But when you sacrifice the 5 creatures, which is quite likely as long as they haven't blown up your board, you can create a 9/7 flying lifelink indestructible with haste. If you haven't won by the time you have 5 creatures out, you will never win. And if they're on 9 life or less by that point, which they should be, Ormondal is all you'll need to win the game. And you can pretty much just throw him at your opponent because he's not going to die, and you get a little bit of a life swing with the lifelink as well. So you can afford to take down a few beatdowns after that if you so wish. So that is going to do it for the deck tech. If you want to see the matches, they shall be following shortly. And as always, remember, if you want your deck to be shown next week, then send it to me however you feel. And I'll be happy to check it out, improve upon it if you ask, or just play it as it is. So, without further ado, if you enjoyed the content, then be sure to like and subscribe, and comment down below if you would like a chatette with me. But as always, I'll see you in the games. See you in a bit.